Hello, my HS358D students. This is your Professor Donald Earl Collins. We are now in week 13. We've made it through Turkey week and Thanksgiving week, depending on whether you understand the erasure of indigenous people and their grievances against the U.S. and Western and colonizers of the Western Hemisphere in general, that sort of thing. But welcome back. We're now literally in the home stretch of the semester, home stretch of this course. I have 2 more lecture days left, and next week is supposed to be presentation week for those of you who are doing in-class presentations. So there are really two things to talk about with you today for the week for those of you who can't make one or both classes this week. One is around what's going to be happening the next couple of weeks, in this course, and one's around actually what I plan on talking about over the next couple of days. So, first, where are we in the course? You have a freestyle um, a project assignment that is due on Sunday, December the 4th by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the general rules for extensions and whatnot apply, but there is a caveat here, and the caveat is this: I can extend you, if you don't ask for an extension, you lose 11 points regardless if you don't meet the deadline. If you are not done with your project by the 11th and have submitted it in some way, shape, or form to me by then, you'll get a 0 on the project, which probably means you'll end up failing the course or at best getting a D. So please get this done first of all. But for those of you who are, obviously going to finish the project, the key thing here in terms of participation for this part of the course for the last couple of weeks is whether other students have the opportunity to take a look and review, critique, give feedback on your comment on the work that you did. Watch the video, saw your PowerPoint presentation, listen to your podcast, read your poetry, read your essay, whatever you plan on doing that's part of your freestyle project. So what that means is they have to have time to do this. Um, Finals, the last day of the formal end of classes is Wednesday, December the 13th. Finals start after that. We don't have a final in this course. So really the final phase of the course for everybody in this class after they've submitted their presentations, with links and so on, or have done the presentation in class, is for other students to be able to comment on your stuff. What that means simply is that if you wait forever to get it to me, other students will not have the chance to review it. So my cutoff essentially is Wednesday, December the 7th. If you have not submitted your, whatever materials you are submitting in order for others to comment on it by the end of the day on December the 7th, the only person who's going to look at it is me, because I am not going to spend all week here's another link, here's another version of what this group decided to do, what this individual decided to do, that kind of thing. I'm not going through all of that. You've had 5 weeks to work on this, including Thanksgiving week for those of you who are the more productive and studious types. 4 weeks if you don't count the week that you took, that you probably took off. But still, it's a month. A month to figure out an artifact, figure out how to talk about it, put together some slides, narrate it yourself, or if you're working in a group, narrate it in tandem or as part of a group of 3 or 4, however you wanted to do it. You had a month to figure this out, and you had a week before that month to basically figure it out in your proposal. So please get this done. Please get this done in the way so that other people can comment on it. So. And that leads me to the other thing. For those of you who are doing video, which is probably the vast majority of you, since I can't accommodate more than 8 groups during the 2 days I've set aside for in-class presentations. 8 groups are individuals between the 2 classes. We only meet an hour and 15 minutes. Everyone's getting probably around 10 plus time for asking questions. Probably takes it out to 15, maybe even close to 20 if you're talking about a larger group. So really there's no room for more than 4 different presentations per class. And that's going to be it. The cutoff is 8. 8 period. So most of you have to record this in some way, shape, or form. Whether you're doing YouTube, whether you're doing Minio, whether I don't know, TikTok. I don't know. I mean, I've never actually used TikTok. Snapchat, um, Spotify, if you're doing a playlist, in addition to regular video, however you're doing it, you need to provide a link. Um, if you haven't noticed, Moodle's not very good with a lot of different things. It is definitely not good with large videos. The most you can download or upload to Moodle is 100 megabytes worth of information, 100 MB, which is not a lot in video land. So unless your video is really, really short, you are going to have to do a link. Use a third party, do a link, provide that link when you submit your materials to Moodle by Sunday, December the 4th, and I will make sure that that link goes out to everybody. And it's got to be a shareable link. It can't be a link where, oh, here's my stuff, but I don't want anyone commenting on it. No, you've got to make sure that it's shareable so other people can comment on it. Yes, it means that potentially somebody who's not in the class would actually be able to comment on your material, but let's be honest. None of us are going to be, I mean, I don't think any of us are planning on being YouTube stars, right? Or Instagram stars or anything along those lines. So there's pretty much no danger really here in terms of sharing this. Especially, you can set it up in such a way that it's shareable just for the class, for whoever has the link, right? Not for the entirety of the world. So make sure to do that. There'll be more instructions around this, that once I send out everything for the week. But I just want to make sure that you understand that your peers are, it's not just me looking at this, your peers are going to be looking at this. They're going to give you feedback. You won't be able to do anything with the feedback in terms of improving your material, but as part of the participation, since you can't present it in class, the alternative is for them to comment on the side. And if you are doing just a paper, fine, do just a paper, talk about it for 5 minutes during class time on Thursday. I don't really care. But what I'm saying is, even if you do that, you want to make sure that it's in Word format so that someone can comment on it, right? Because they'll be commenting directly on your essay or writings for your particular project. So there's that too. If you're doing a collage, same thing. Leave some space for people to leave comments. So, I mean, that's the main thing in terms of what needs to be done. Obviously, I have office hours this week if people have questions. Virtual office hours on Wednesday from 2 to 3:30, off regular office hours from 12:30 to around 1:30 or so. Usually I leave around 1:25. I've only had a couple people come see me in person this semester because people would prefer to not wear masks, I take it. So that's fine. If we need to schedule some other time, as long as I've got time to do it, I will try to do it. With some limitations because not, I'm not somebody that you spin out of a genie bottle every time you need some help. So take that into account. So I think that's it in terms of what we talk about this week. There'll be more in the announcements page to go with this video about what we're doing for the week and what to be prepared for in terms of your projects and how to load them, load up, well, not how to load them up, but how to, what things you should do in terms of getting links and those kinds of things. So, I need to do your discussion grades for the previous couple of weeks. I will do that probably sometime later this week. No big surprises there. And like I said, hopefully between the proposal and this, things will ultimately balance out in terms of people's grades. I will let you know where things stand more probably at the end of week 14 than right now, because, we got to get through this. And I hope that before I start, that everyone is back healthy. But let me reiterate, if you are not feeling well for whatever reason, whether it's for mental health purposes, because of stress, because you might actually have COVID or RSV or the flu or some combination of all three or 2 out of 3 or whatever else might be going on, if you You do not have to show up for class in person. That's the one thing, even if you've used up all 7 of your absences for the semester unquestioned, that's the one thing I will always excuse you for. So please be an adult and let me know, as opposed to coming to class and trying to gut it out. You're not doing me any favors. You're certainly not doing your classmates any favors. So and some of you probably are not going to be feeling well at the time by the time this video hits later today, in announcements. So you don't have to come to class, and we're virtual tomorrow anyway. We're virtual on Tuesday, November 29th, and then after that we are in person the remainder of the semester, unless circumstances dictate that I don't have to be or we don't need to be. So there's that. So anyway, let me get to it. So this week, this final week, is really the Civil War and emancipation. I will take you a little bit into Reconstruction on Thursday, but really this week is the culmination of the end of everything that's happened in the course. It is the end of slavery in the United States on a mass scale. What I mean by that is, yes, there's the exception of mass incarceration, and folks that are there are employed in ways that are slavery-esque, but it's not chattel slavery. You can see it as generational slavery, in the sense that generations of criminalized black bodies, brown bodies, and even poor white bodies have found their way in the prison system doing work for free, or nearly for free, or for very low wages, while being abused as part of that system. That is to be sure. But it is not the same as chattel slavery. No matter how much it might seem similar, it is not the same, right? It is not the same. So, as brutal as it is, it's not the same. And so, I'm not saying that that's not important. That's something that we can discuss in a course called African American History from 1865 to the present, which I am teaching next semester. But as for the purposes of this course, it's just not the same. And it would be, while it might approximate some of the horrors of the slave system, it is not slavery in that same sense. It's just not. The country's not built on the backs of imprisoned people. Certainly not since 1865 it hasn't been. It's definitely been a contributor to the economy, to say the least, but not literally. The entire country is built on the backs of folks enslaved through mass incarceration and mass criminalization. So, with that said, the point of this is really to talk about the role African Americans played in the Civil War, the role that they played in helping the Union win the Civil War, the role that they played in shaping what the Civil War really was about, which is ultimately ending slavery in the United States, not about states' rights. Because again, if we're talking about states' rights, right to do what? The right for white men to own people. That's what we're talking about. White men, white women to own people, particularly people who are of African descent. Those folks, right? Those millions of folks. And so that's what we're talking about. And so the Civil War, there will be no discussion of major battles. I'm not talking about Vicksburg or Gettysburg. I'm not talking about, Antietam, or the Southern Forks, or the Dismal Swamp, or I might talk about William Tecumseh Sherman's March to the Sea, while going through Atlanta and burning Atlanta to the ground, which is why there's an underground Atlanta in the first place. The underground Atlanta is the Atlanta before the Civil War, before Sherman came marching through in 1864 and his troops burned downtown to the ground, and marched to Savannah and up north through the Carolinas, right, to cut off any major retreat by Lee and his forces into the Appalachians and other parts in order to continue the Civil War. So what are African Americans doing to be part of this war? Well, they're escaping slavery to join the Union Army. 186,000 African American men and women, mostly men, but some women as nurses and other things, end up joining the Union effort in a direct way. Many more ran away, and swelled the population of Washington, D.C., helped swell it to about 500,000 people at the height of the Civil War. Washington, D.C. had all these camps. There's the black community that was there before the Civil War just grew by a factor of three, from about 14,000 people, including 11,000 freed persons, to over 40,000 in the span of a decade, right? Um, that's what we're talking about here. You throw in the role of African Americans in terms of advising Lincoln, the Frederick Douglasses of the world, right? Who in fact, advised them around the thing known as the Emancipation Proclamation. For those of you who do not know the difference, the Emancipation Proclamation literally frees no one. You can call Lincoln the Great Emancipator because he helped push what eventually would become the 13th Amendment to the Constitution after he was reelected in 1864, right? He pushes that at the eve of the start of 1865. It's part of his inaugural address. Congress is actually um, um, not ratified the amendment, but passed it so for ratification before Lincoln's assassination on April 14th and 15th of 1865. But the Emancipation Proclamation frees no one. It's doublespeak. It's typical politician doublespeak. What it basically says is this: for those who are in Confederate territory, for those of who are still enslaved in Confederate territory, if you can make your way to either Union lines within the Confederacy, so Northern Virginia, the border states, wherever the Union Army is, you can be free the moment you meet with the Union Army. Or if you make your way all the way to the Union, make your way all the way to Washington, D.C. and Maryland, make your way all the way to other parts of, Illinois or Indiana or Ohio or Pennsylvania, you are free, right? And that's the Emancipation Proclamation. It didn't free anybody. It freed those who were thinking about running away to run away, to escape and steal their own bodies so that they could be free. So just throwing that in there so that you have a full understanding of Lincoln's political posturing as part of an effort to basically disrupt what was happening, disrupt everyday life in the South. And if you issue a proclamation that says an executive order, really is what it is, an executive order that says, come here, if you want to be free, steal yourself so that we can, allow you to be free. Wherever we are, you'll be free, right? That encouraged a lot of people to run away. Obviously, if 186,000 people ultimately joined the Union Army, joined the ranks of the 54, Regiment of Massachusetts, which is glorified in the movie Glory, which happens to have Matthew Broderick, Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, and a host of other folks in the film. The sort of glorified the role that these folks played in fighting against the Confederacy. So there were more than 25,000 slaves pulled in to Confederate side to fight on the side of the Confederacy during the war. But you can imagine how unenthusiastic those 25,000 folks would have been to fight on the Confederate side. And so many of them, which is one of the reasons why there were only 25,000, given the number of black folk, number of enslaved black folk living in the South, 4 million, and you only got 25,000 throughout the war. That tells you a lot, right? If the war's not about slavery, why not use the enslaved, right? It was just about states' rights, anyway. So there's that. And so that's part of what we'll be talking about this week. The other part of what we're talking about is what happens afterward, right? After Lee and his army of Virginia surrenders in the Appomattox on April 9th of 1865, and 5-6 days later, Lincoln being assassinated at Ford's Theater in downtown Washington, D.C., and John Wilkes Booth and his group of treasonous folk, make off and try to escape the Union Army, which eventually tracks them down and hangs them all for their role in the first assassination of President of the United States. This guy paid with his life, right? So that kind of thing. What happens afterward? Well, there are really three things. 13th Amendment passes, and which officially ends slavery in the United States. Hooray! Yes, right. Except with the exception, of course, of those who are incarcerated as felons, right? With that one exception, which of course has become a bigger exception over, less of an exception over time, and a bigger problem in this country over time. But put that aside for a second because that's not the majority of folks who are black we're talking about here at this point. Um, there's that. All the Union states ratified this amendment, between April and December of 1865. In the meantime, those parts of the South which the parts of the Confederacy that never fell to Union soldiers, deep southern um, Florida or Texas, took time for the news that the Union won to reach some of these places. And some of that is incorporated in the understanding of the holiday now known as Juneteenth, right? Where people of Galveston, Texas, enslaved black folk of Galveston, Texas, celebrated, as the Union Army let them know that they were free, right? This huge celebration, which included southern Texas, would make its way to other parts of the country, even D.C. for a few decades, before it became sort of just generally reiterated and re-celebrated throughout the country, among African Americans in various sectors. In the last, say, 50 or 60 years since the Civil Rights era. And now is a national holiday for better and for worse. So there's that. But the truth is, the 13th Amendment officially ends slavery in the United States. There are stories about people who did not find out about the 13th Amendment or the Union surrender, maybe until 1870 or 1871. But that's maybe a few hundred enslaved folks here and a few hundred enslaved folks there. For the most part, 90 something percent would have known by early January of 1866 that they were free. And so that ends it. But that's not the end of things. Black codes are immediately issued by the former Confederate states to try to control the population, control their movement, control what kind of work they could get, what side of the street they could stand on, whether they could stand on sidewalks or not when a white woman passed by, all kinds of other stuff in order to control this population. Radical Republicans don't like the fact that Andrew Johnson, who's taken over as president from Abraham Lincoln, has gone ahead and said, "Hey, let's have all these things support the South so that the South doesn't feel like they've lost everything, right? They could maintain their way of life as close to the slavery as possible." And so the Radical Republicans rally. They end up winning a supermajority in both the House and the Senate in the midterm elections of 1866. And they immediately get to work in what's now known as Reconstruction. That's how Reconstruction starts, to reconstruct the South so that it does not, in fact, put the formerly enslaved black folk back into some sort of servitude akin to slavery, right? I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but among the things that they do is the most important thing is the passage of the 14th Amendment in 1868 and ratification of it in 1868. It officially makes formerly enslaved black folk, now freed men and freed women, citizens of the United States. So at this point is when you can go from saying enslaved blacks, freed blacks, freed blacks, freed black women, freed black men, to saying African Americans, because they're now officially Americans. They're now United States citizens. So if you can say that, then you are an American, which means we're talking about black Americans or African Americans at this point, which is why I've had to constantly correct myself this entire semester over saying, African American, because you can't say enslaved African Americans if you're talking about people who are not citizens of the United States. It makes no sense. And when people say that in videos and documentaries and other places, part of my head is, the inside of my head scratching because it's not true. You can't be a citizen if you're not allowed to be one. And so there's that aspect of things. I could talk about more, but the other thing, the most important thing to understand about this whole period is that African Americans aren't just sitting around. Free black men and women aren't just sitting around going, slavery's over, hooray. They're trying to rebuild families. They're trying to establish new communities. They're trying to find new working relationships with people who used to own them. In some cases, staying on those plantations. In other cases, leaving to work on other plantations because it was just so horrible where they were that it doesn't matter who else. If the people they end up working with are also former slave owners, they owned them, and therefore that meant that they could establish a different kind of relationship with these folks, even if it meant that they were still in some sort of servitude. It's still not chattel slavery. Sharecropping is not the same as slavery, no matter what anyone else says, right? Or finding skilled work, or you know, in some cases, helping to iron out some of the more political types of issues that were present during Reconstruction, like the rewriting of state constitutions and those kinds of things. In other words, African Americans weren't just waiting on the government of Washington, D.C. to do stuff for them, right? And no matter how many times I say it, there will always be some students, white and black, who will say, what happened during Reconstruction, the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, and they'll leave it at that. And I'm kind of like, but there's all this other stuff that black people were doing too, right? They weren't just idly sitting by waiting for white people to do stuff for them. So there's that. And I will end that here. I'll talk more about all of this on Tuesday and on Thursday.